Hey everyone, this is Brian from OptimizeForOutcomes.com, back with a new week and a new topic. Now, I know I said a couple of weeks ago, I introduced this concept of people systems and looking at four different phases of the people management life cycle. And I was going to cover each one of those four phases, one per week. But I want to call a little bit of an audible here, and I want to cover another topic that is related to our first phase, which is hire. I want to talk through interviewing and how to do good interviews. I want to give you a system that you can use so that you can do better interviews yourself. Interviewing is one of those things they don't teach in school. And depending on where you work in your career, you might not even get training on how to interview, even though people will expect you to do it. And as a business owner or a team leader, knowing how to interview is a really valuable skill. That's what's going to help you build a team that is going to take your business to new heights. So let's go ahead and get into it. So like a lot of things in business, performing a good interview starts before the interview itself actually happens. It starts with planning. So you want to be able to think through, first and foremost, what is the role that you're trying to fill? And you want to paint a picture of what that role is, what the tasks in that role are, and how much time you need somebody to do that role in your business. So once you've identified what it is this role is going to do, you want to start translating that into what skills and experiences does a person need to have in order to do that role well. And when you do that, think about them in two different ways. There's going to be a list of must-haves. There's going to be a list of nice-to-haves. Any skill or experience that you want them to have, divide it out into those two categories. When you do this, though, I want you to be realistic about what is going to be available to you in the marketplace. So all too often I see job descriptions or job postings where they ask for 100 different things as must have 20 years of experience doing this thing and 10 years doing this other thing. And we want all of these extra skills, and it just, people get crazy sometimes with what they ask for in the job description. So make sure that you're being realistic about what package of skills you're going to find out there in the marketplace. Another thing you want to think about is when you talk about skills that are must-have versus nice to have, think about the things that are easy to teach versus the things that are difficult to teach when you're hiring for any role. You're going to have skills that are very easy to teach. You're going to have skills that you're going to need that are very difficult to teach. And when you plan out those must-haves, you're going to be better off putting in the skills that are difficult to teach as the must-haves and the skills that are easy to teach as the nice-to-haves. Now, this sounds a little funny when you put it into a job description sometimes, but let me walk through an actual example and it should help you understand what I'm talking about. So one of my last corporate hires, I was looking for a Salesforce administrator. Salesforce, if you're not familiar with it, it's a customer relationship management application used primarily in larger businesses. Enterprise stuff that it does is very valuable to larger companies. It's pretty expensive for smaller companies, but I needed to find this Salesforce administrator to help manage the software. And because of the team that I already had in place, I had different people that were expert level in managing the software. I wanted to complement that with a more junior person that was just starting out, maybe had 1 or 2 years experience with Salesforce, and just round out the team a little bit better and create some dimensions to that team. Now, we had a bunch of people apply, and I looked through a number of different candidates, and a lot of people had really good Salesforce experience, 1, 2, 3 years working on some pretty complicated projects, and their technical skills were really good, at least looking at their resume. And we interviewed a couple of those folks, and they were all good, but we threw a wild card into the mix as well. So one of the people that I wanted to really talk to had no real Salesforce experience. They had done a couple of pro bono projects. They were self-taught and really just starting on their journey of learning this software and learning how to manage this software. But here's what they did have. They had 10 years of experience working as a flight attendant. Now, when you think about that, think about the kinds of skills that you would learn being a flight attendant for 10 years. And think about how that's going to apply in other jobs, even if they're not being a flight attendant. As a flight attendant for 10 years, you're going to have lots of experience dealing with really upset customers, very difficult situations where you don't really have control over what's going on, right? I mean, a flight attendant on a plane is not really in charge of the plane. The pilot is in charge of the plane, and a flight attendant can't decide to go back to the gate if they want to. They're kind of stuck in their situation, and they have to make the best of what's going on around them. And this person was able to do that successfully for 10 years. And so when I think through what skills does this person have from their experience, those are things that are really difficult to teach. I don't want to try and teach somebody 10 years worth of real experience of dealing with difficult customers. That would be very difficult, if not impossible, for me to teach somebody in a quick, short period of time. On the flip side of that, Salesforce is very easy to teach. When you talk about administering software, it's really not that complicated. And Salesforce has a lot of great free training out there. This is not a pitch for Salesforce, but Salesforce is a good application if it fits your needs. I knew that if she could learn on her own, which she showed that she could do, and she had a desire to move into this new field and grow her skills and abilities, the stuff that she missed on my list of must-haves and nice-to-haves was all stuff that was easy to teach. And the stuff that she had was very difficult to teach, even though it seemed a little bit counterintuitive. You're hiring for a Salesforce admin. Don't you want somebody that's been using Salesforce for a long time? Sure, that'd be great, but there's a lot of potential here and opportunity to do great things with a resource that has these other skills that are very difficult to teach. And I can teach her the stuff she needs to know specific to Salesforce, and she can be a great employee in a couple of months' time, just improving and getting better and learning. So when we talk about must-haves versus nice-to-haves, keep that in mind. The must-haves should be things that are difficult to teach, that you don't want to teach, that apply to your role that you have, and let the nice-to-haves be the things that are easier to teach or the things that you don't mind teaching. And that's going to help you get more value out of the people that you do hire. So I mentioned in there also thinking about the team as a whole. When you're hiring, you want to think about, who do I already have on this team and what skills do they have? Now, if you're a solo entrepreneur, you're evaluating yourself. What skills do you have? What things are you bad at? What things or skills would complement your skill set very well? Anytime you're going into an interview and trying to figure out who to interview, this is one of the things you want to think about is, what is the makeup of the team? Where are there gaps or holes? Where do we need a new skill set, or where do we need to bulk up on skill sets that we have? Be thinking about the whole team dynamic from a skills perspective. The other side of that is you want to think about it from a diversity perspective. Anytime you make a hire, it's an opportunity to evaluate the diversity of your team. Think about the diversity of your team and how that relates to your customers or your potential customers. And you want to make sure that there's good alignment between the diversity of your team and the diversity of your customers. One thing you want to keep in mind when you're considering the team is you want to make sure that you end up with different personality types from the perspective of people that are super go-getters and trying to conquer the world versus people that just want to come in and do a good job and go home at the end of the day. It's a mistake that's often made where people go out and they try and hire all rock stars, all type A personalities, and they get this team built and everybody's trying to take over the world. And what happens there is you start to get conflict and you get people that don't agree, people trying to go in different directions. And from just an operating a team perspective, it will be better for everybody if you have a balance of the super driven, I want to take over the world types, and the people that are like, hey, I just want to come in and do a good job today and go home types. If you balance those, you'll end up with a more well-rounded team. You'll end up with less conflict. You need to have a good balance between leaders and followers in order to make that team successful in the long run. Another thing you want to think about is the environment that this person is going to be working in. And when I talk about environment, it's things like the pace of work, physical constraints. Think about, is this person going to step into an environment of ambiguity where they just have to go and figure things out and there's not a lot of guidance or help for them, versus somebody that's going to come into an environment where they just need to follow a process. You don't really need them to think for themselves. You just want them to come in and, hey, here's this 12-step process, follow this 50 times a day. That's important to think about because you need to try and match the person coming into this role and the environment that they're going to be put into. I've seen a lot of times where somebody comes into an environment and they're just this creative free thinker and they want to be able to come in and solve problems and look at new ways of doing things, and they get put into an environment where they're expected to just follow a standard operating procedure. They don't really get the opportunity to be creative, and it just ends up creating a bad situation that ends in a relatively short amount of time. I've seen people come into environments that are maybe a little bit more wild and rough, and they haven't been able to, because of their personality. It's not that they were a bad employee. It's not that they didn't have skills, but their personality was such, they were much more introverted, and they kind of got steamrolled in that environment because it was fairly aggressive, lots of extroverts, and it just didn't match well the job that they were trying to do and the environment that they had to do it in. So the environment is very important to consider as well. What type of person do you need to be successful in the environment that they're going to have to work in? The next thing you want to think about is you should have more than one opinion on any interview that you do. And again, even if you're a solo entrepreneur, look for ways to get other people involved. If you're making a hire, have a close friend, or maybe you have a family member, somebody that can participate in an interview with you to just give you a second opinion of, hey, should I hire this person? What were your vibes? And so at this point in the planning, you want to make sure that you have identified who are the people. If you've got other team members, you can always bring them into the process. I've used customers in the past, internal customers for internal roles, where I've had other folks within the organization that weren't on my team come and participate in the interview process as well. So look around, find somebody that you trust, and bring at least one other person into this process. But identify at this stage who are the people that are going to participate in this interview process for filling this role. Then once you have that done, you can start going through identifying the questions that you're going to ask this person. Now, I recommend a hybrid approach to thinking about your questions. You're not going to try and write down every single question that you want to ask in an interview, but you do want to have some leading questions around the different subjects or areas that you want to dive into. Now, when you start formulating these questions that should align with your must-haves and trying to understand, does this person fit the must-haves that I have written for this job? So you want to make sure that the questions will give you the answers that you need to make that assessment of, does this person have skills A, B, and C that I said were must-haves? Another thing you want to do in formulating your questions, and this is a mistake that I see a lot, but I think it's one of those things. Again, interviewing is not taught in schools, and so many people get thrust into interviewing in the corporate space with no training or a little bit of training, and they just go off of their past experiences and how they've been interviewed in the past. And so this happens a lot, and please don't do this. You don't want to do this when you come up with your questions. I refer to them as pop quiz questions. You do not want to ask pop quiz questions in an interview. A pop quiz question is really more about the book answers to things. It's more about theory and less about application of the actual skills or what experiences might be gained in a previous role or a work environment. So here's an example of a pop quiz question versus not. And I'll use the area of project management. So just a quick lesson, project management is broken up into 9 knowledge areas that cover different focus points or different threads within managing projects. And so if I was interviewing for a project manager, this is a pop quiz question. Can you tell me what the knowledge areas of project management are? So I'm testing, does this person know the textbook answer? But when I ask that, that's about all I'm going to get from that. And there's a couple of problems with that. One, just like we all did in school, or a lot of us did in school, you can cram for a test and you can pass it without really knowing the subject matter, without really knowing what you're talking about, because it's just memorizing answers to things and then being able to recall those answers. You don't really understand it. You don't really know how it fits into a bigger picture. You've never actually done anything with it, but you can regurgitate a textbook answer. That's a dangerous side of asking pop quiz questions in an interview process. This person could have crammed, they might know the buzzwords, but they don't actually have any real applicable experience in what it is you're asking them. Now, here's a different way to ask this question that's going to give you not only an understanding of, do they understand the knowledge areas of project management, but how have they leveraged that knowledge in the past, and can they talk through application of that knowledge? So ask it this way instead. Tell me about a time where your understanding of the project management knowledge areas was useful in a project that you were working on. Okay, so now I'm asking them not only to articulate some understanding of project management and the knowledge areas of project management, but I'm also asking them to relate that to an actual experience that they've had working. So I will be able to understand, do they at least know one area or one of the 9 knowledge areas of project management? I'm also going to be able to understand how they applied that knowledge in a previous situation. So that's going to help me understand their way of working. It's going to help me understand how they process information. It's going to help me understand potentially how they solve problems. And I'm still going to know whether or not they know what the knowledge areas, or at least one of the knowledge areas of project management is. So I'll give you another example of how to do this with a different topic, just so you have a couple of examples to think about. Let's say you're looking for somebody that can deal with customers in difficult situations, and that's one of the things that you've identified as a must-have. So here are a couple of ways you could phrase a question and get a great answer from a candidate, or get great understanding. You might get a terrible answer, but you'll at least get good understanding and be able to assess the candidate better based on their answer. So here's one way to ask it. Can you tell me about a time where you were working with an irate customer? What were they upset about, and what did you do to handle it? Okay, here's another example. Can you tell me about a customer complaint that you had to deal with and how you handled it? And then a third example. Can you tell me about a time you worked with a customer that was upset, but they were happy after you helped them? So a couple of examples of how you ask a question in a form that not only tests their book knowledge, but also gets them to talk about their experiences and how they've applied that knowledge to experiences in the past. Now, I mentioned this before, and I just want to touch on it quickly again. you don't want to try and come up with every single question that you might ask somebody in an interview process. You want to focus on the general subject areas and opening questions that will allow you to go in and start discussing a particular topic. And then from there, you're going to free flow questions based off of how they respond to your initial question. Now looking at the interview process, we're finally ready. We've done all of our prep work. We're ready to start the actual interviews. And I'm assuming in this case that there's a separate recruiting process where you're actually going out and finding these candidates. I'm not covering that today. We're going into we found some candidates and we actually want to execute the interview now. So we're assuming that you've got that scheduled. You're ready to come in and start the interview. How do you do that? I will say this, there are lots of different ways you can do successful interviews. My way is not just the only right way, and you have to follow this to a T. Do what works well for you. Okay. Ultimately, that's the thing with just about anything and everything that I teach. Do what works well for you. Take what I tell you, adopt it to you and your business. If you want to just steal what I have, that's fine as well. Take what I'm doing and use it as your own, but also don't be afraid to modify this. And if you found something that works better for you, see if you can integrate that into what I show you, and that'll make a better process and a better system for you. So talking about the interview process, I'm going to explain how I've done it. And this is a refinement of interviewing hundreds of people over about a 15-year period in the corporate space. I did a lot of team building and a lot of interviewing, and over time just refined to this process that still works well for me today. I don't think I've made really major changes to this in probably 5 years. When I start an interview process, I'm going to start off with an introduction, and I'm just going to explain a little bit about my background. I'm going to explain a little bit about the team and the environment that the person is coming into. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the role and just give that general introduction to help lay a foundation for, hey, this is how they should be framing their answers. This is how they should be framing the discussions. It allows you to lay out information that you would expect them to know as the interview process goes on. So you're doing it in a way where you're setting them up with the right information so that when they answer future questions, one of the things you want to be thinking about is, are they relating that to the information that I gave them at the beginning around the role, around the environment, around what they're coming into? At that point, I will then turn it over to the candidate and ask them to follow with an introduction of their own. And I will typically ask them to highlight anything on their resume. So if I was interviewing and I just finished my introduction, I would say, so that's a little bit about me. Why don't you give me a brief introduction about yourself? And I have your resume and I've read through it, but if you want to call out any specific highlights of things that you worked on that you feel like are applicable to this role that you're interviewing for, call those out as you talk through it. But just a few minutes, please introduce yourself. I would say something like that, just to get them started. And I want to be able to see here, how well can they retain the information that I've already given them? How well can they relate their experience to what I've given them? I also want to see what they're going to do when I ask them to give a few minutes of introduction. Are they going to ramble on for 10 minutes, or are they going to give me 2 or 3 minutes? Are they going to highlight the best information? Because I'm thinking about, I'm going to have to deal with this person on a regular basis. I need to know the important details, not their whole life story. And so I'm gauging that here as I ask them for an introduction. So as they're giving that introduction, if they get onto a topic that relates to my must-haves as they're introducing themselves and their experiences, I might stop and then start to drill down. Okay. And this is where the free flow of questions comes in based on what you're hearing. If somebody starts talking about this really complicated project that they led at one of their jobs, and I'm looking for a project manager, I might stop them at that point and start asking some of those deeper questions to say, tell me a little bit more about this project. How did it start? What was your involvement? And I'm going to drill down into that topic as it comes up. once you get through that introduction, that's when you can start with your list of different topics and the questions that you've identified to get you into conversation around the different topics. Okay, so you might have asked one or two of those depending on how that introduction went, but this gives you the opportunity then to go on to the next and figure out, okay, of these things that we haven't talked about, what do I want to dive into first? And then you ask that question. And then after you ask that question, you're going to free flow into your conversation. And that's really a key part of this is you're trying to have more natural conversations about the person's abilities and their experiences, as opposed to going back to should not be a pop quiz, question 1, question 2, question 3, question 4. The more you can make it a natural conversation, one, the better the candidate's going to feel. It's more like, hey, I'm in this environment that's just a little bit easier. It's a lot easier to have a conversation with somebody than it is to be grilled with test questions. So you're going to get better answers. You're going to eliminate, at least to an extent, some of the nerves that come along with interviewing, and you're going to get a better view of who is this person really. Now, one of the tactics that I use in interviewing and asking questions is I want to understand more about how this person presents information. Do they fluff it up? Do they over exaggerate? How much do they stretch the truth? And having a resume in front of you and being able to ask questions about what's on that resume is a great indicator of how well you can trust somebody. Trust to give you the right information. Trust that they're not going to cover something up if they don't know what's going on, and that they'll come and ask for help when they need it. And I always try and test that in any interview that I'm doing, no matter what the role is. I always look for an opportunity to test that a little bit. How well can I trust the information that this person has given me? Just because for me, trust is number one. If I can't trust you, I don't want you on my team. I don't want to work with you. I have to be able to trust you, because that's the only thing that helps me sleep at night is I've got a team of people that I can trust, and I can take their word when they tell me something, and I know that they're going to come and ask me when they need help. All things are very important for me in building successful teams. So I like to find things that are odd or unique on a person's resume that I can actually ask about. And I'll give you an example of that. So I had a candidate that had on his resume that he was trained as a Six Sigma green belt. Okay, if you don't know what Six Sigma is, it's a process improvement methodology popularized by General Motors, 3M, Motorola, a bunch of other big companies that use it. And it's all about finding defects in processes and removing those defects to improve what it is you're doing. So he had on his resume, he was a trained but not certified. He did disclose he wasn't certified. He had only gone through the training, but he was a very well-trained Six Sigma green belt, just without the certification. So it just so happens that in my corporate time, I got certified as a Six Sigma black belt. I went up to black belt level. I taught classes on Six Sigma. I ran the Six Sigma program at one of the subsidiaries that I worked at, trainings, mentoring. I spent a lot of time studying and helping other people through Six Sigma. So here's something that it's a little bit of an oddity. And he had it on his resume, and I have a lot of knowledge there, so I could drill into that. And I first asked him the question. This was a job that did require some level of project management. So I asked him to talk to me about a time where he ran a Six Sigma project, what the project was, what he was trying to do with it, and how that went. And he kind of fumbled around before ultimately acknowledging, I've never actually run a formal project in a work environment. Okay, that's fine. But now is where you free flow, right? So he gave an answer. It wasn't a great answer. And I want to free flow now and drill into this. Instead of just moving on to my next question, I want to drill in, because that's where I'm going to find real information. So I asked him the follow-up question, can you tell me about a time then that you used a Six Sigma tool in your work? How did that go? What tool was it? How did it benefit you, etc.? And again, he just kind of fumbled around. Eventually he told me, I haven't used any tools in a real work environment. I'm just trained. So then I asked him, name a Six Sigma tool. Just give me the name of one. You don't have to tell me what it does. Can you name a Six Sigma tool? Same thing. He fumbled around a little bit, and then ultimately he admitted he couldn't name a tool. So you go back to, why did I drill down on this thing? It didn't even relate actually very much to the job, but I wanted to see, how does he present information? Number one, how much fluff is there in what it is that he presents? Will he ask for help if he doesn't know the answer, or does he try and fake his way through an answer? And ultimately it did not work out well for him. But just going through that process of picking out this anomaly thing and drilling into it a little bit, I was able to learn within a 5-minute period of answering and asking and answering questions that he was not the right candidate for what it was that I was trying to do. Okay, so finishing up here, getting to the end of the interview process, it's always good to leave time for the candidate to ask questions, give them an opportunity to ask for any clarity, ask any follow-up questions. This will give you good perspective into their real interest in the company, in the job, in you, the team, etc. It's not a great sign if they don't have any questions. They should be able to come up with at least 1 or 2 questions, things that haven't been covered, asking about the role, asking about you as a leader, asking about the company. They should be able to come up with something. If they don't, it's not 100% disqualifier, but it goes to show that they potentially don't care as much about the role, unless you've had really engaging conversation and the rest of the interviewing has gone really well. It's not a complete disqualifier if they have no questions, but it is one of those flags that you, at the end of it, you're looking at what were the flags and why this person wouldn't be a fit. That's potentially a flag that you would consider. So give them opportunity to ask questions, see what they come up with, and that then will close out the actual interview piece of this system. At this point, you're going to meet, you want to debrief with the others that participated in the process and see if you can come up to a consensus on who do I hire, if anybody, of the people that were interviewed. Now, at this point, don't be afraid to go back to the drawing board. If you didn't find somebody that you really like, it's okay to start over. It's better to start over than to bring somebody into your business that you're not super stoked about bringing into your business. You can have a lot of problems if you bring somebody in and you're not really sold on them. So it's better for you to go back and start over than it is for you to hire somebody that you don't really get excited for. The other thing I would say is, if you do go back, don't be afraid to go through and adjust what it is that you've done. You might find that the combination of skills and experience that you asked for are really difficult to find, or they don't necessarily exist even. You might find that where you're looking for people, you're getting the wrong people. You might have to redo some of your recruiting process as well, but don't be afraid to go back and challenge your initial thinking and make adjustments as you go into a new round of interviews with a new batch of candidates. So that covers the interviewing process. This is a system that you can use. I do have on the website in the written article a summary of all of the system attributes. So you can jump over and take a look at that, use that the way that you want to. Like I said, if you just want to exactly copy this system, it's there for you to do that. Know that that summary is there to give you the baseline for using this system to process your interviews. If you have any questions on any of that, please feel free to email me, brian@optimizeforoutcomes.com. Remember, for those of you outside of the US, I am an American, so we spell optimize with a Z, not an S. And if you need some additional help with your hiring, team planning, interviewing, etc., I do have available a few spots to work one-on-one in helping you establish your team's roadmap and help you build the team that you need for your business. So you can reach out to me at that same email address, brian@optimizeforoutcomes.com, if you have any questions on that. Thanks for your time today, and I will see you online.